Welcome to Morgan Latif Presents. It is my privilege to introduce Randal Tiny Smith, who is a consistent speaker at conferences on the topic of electric cars and electrification. He actually project managed the launch of a Jaguar I-Pace many years ago, which was the first EV from a premium OEM. And so we cover a lot of topics. He's an extremely knowledgeable guy. Topics such as where did it all go wrong? There's a little bit of controversy in the podcast around that. Also, what can Europe do to compete with China? This is a big topic in the market. And finally, how has the media played a role in the perception of EVs? So it was a very fruitful conversation, and you're going to love it. And so let's get into it. Tiny, or for people that don't know, your actual name is Randal. But what people don't know is that you're about 1,000 foot tall. So that's the irony behind the name. But I've been wanting to speak to you about the topic of the EVs and generally just everything that's going on in that world, because Morgan Latif, we've had quite a very interesting year when it comes to the EV market, and I think everybody has, right? And and I keep thinking, right, okay, who would know what's going on? Who would know? Who's the guy, the go-to guy?
You couldn't find anybody else, so you came to me. I know.
So we landed on Tiny. No, and so it's a pleasure to have you on, and it's going to be really interesting because, I think from my side, the question that keeps coming into my mind, because I speak to my customers and they're struggling, and I think that's for a wide variety of reasons. Globally, I think there's an element there of what's going on in the world as well, but the feeling is, where did it all go wrong? That's the general feeling. Of what I'm getting from my customers and kind of how I'm seeing the market. And kind of, I would be interested to get your opinion on that because, I mean, what do you think? Where did it all go wrong?
Very controversial. One of the things that gets very interesting when you analyze this sort of stuff right from the start is a lot of people have a headline awareness and the way the media grabs hold of things. The media are very good at focusing in on a very small piece. If EV sales, like house price sales, for example, if house prices dip for 2 months, the media will jump on it and say there's a house price crash happening. But if you look longer term and get into the detail, you'll see that overall there's a longer trend. And a lot of the stuff with EVs is to get into the detail to understand the bigger picture, which puts a totally different context on what you would normally read on social media or in the media or whatever else. Where did it go wrong? I don't think it has gone wrong. I think if you look at overall sales for EVs, EV sales are still going up. They dipped slightly, but they were still in the positive when countries withdrew all the subsidies trying to buy EVs back in 2022. So you saw this sort of meteoric rise going on with EV sales. Subsidies were withdrawn, and then the meteoric rise sort of leveled off a little bit. But they're still going up. If you look at sales in the UK, for example, year on year up to October, EV sales, pure battery electric vehicles, went up by about 24% in October 24 compared to a year previously. All other vehicles, petrol, diesel, HEV and PHEV, all went down into the negative. So that's still a positive news that EV sales are still going up. I think one of the big problems we have is social media. The problem with social media is you could tell a lie once and it remains a lie. Tell it 1,000 times across social media and it becomes the truth. We saw this with the Nicola Bulley case, where the lady unfortunately drowned in the river. We saw it with the Princess of Wales health scare earlier in the year, where if there's no information, people will just make up their own information. And you see that time and time again with EVs. And the situation is a worldwide problem, but it seems to be particularly bad in the UK. And it's got so bad that the House of Lords the Environment and Climate Change Committee from the Lords in February this year wrote a report to the government, which basically said, failure of the government to counteract all this negativity coming out because it's now so ingrained and in so many people, it's now affecting the automotive industry, and the government needs to react on that and counter it. But the trouble is now you're getting into the situation where you counter it with the truth, and people say, well, that's just a government cover-up to protect the EV industry. And you're going, no, that's the truth. Batteries are always exploding. No, it's fact that petrol cars are 20 times more likely to explode than a battery electric car. Oh no, that's just the government covering it up. No, and time and time again you do this. You constantly fighting this negativity all the way through. So generally, overall, yeah, EV sales still going up. I think we saw a slight dip when the government withdrew subsidies. That caused a problem. We also have a situation where we have the perfect storm happened. So when COVID happened, everything dropped down, industry dropped down, people were put on furlough, et cetera, et cetera. And then when we came out of COVID, governments around the world started throwing loads of money into industry to try and regenerate it. That happened. It went up. EV sales rocketed and went skywards. And then all of a sudden, the bubble burst, and loans became more expensive. People couldn't afford to buy EVs. That caused a problem. There was an oversupply of cars. So all of a sudden, you had this perfect storm situation. Too many cars and not enough people to buy them. So again, it's getting into the detail of everything to understand the facts behind what's actually going on. You know, the perfect storm, that's not just EVs, that's all cars. Sales went down. It wasn't just EVs that people were talking about.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's probably about 6 or 7, maybe even 8 different things that are making an impact on it. And actually, one thing you just said there, which I hadn't really thought about, is that actually 20%, increase in sales is actually, a lot of companies would bite your hand off for that level of growth, right? And I do think that there is an element of, because the EV market did have such a big start, in the sense of some companies were growing 100%, some 70%, and that's like crazy numbers. And that's what kind of created the hype around it. And but because they got used to that kind of, not really a false economy, but because they got used to that level of growth, 20% isn't cutting it. And do you think there's an element though of that companies, because they did have so much success, they overinvested, and so it's not actually that the market or the EV cars are the problem, but it's more how the companies have more sort of managed it, so to speak, and how, I mean, it's kind of unpredictable in some ways as well. But
yeah, I think that basically happened because, I say, as we came out of COVID, there was a massive uprise in the market. Car sales were going, loans were cheap, everybody was buying cars, and then everybody, the industry oversupplied cars. They stocked up, they got the manpower and everything else. When the bubble burst, all of a sudden you went, well, hang on, my year-on-year sales, I was predicted at X%, but I'm actually achieving, lower than that. So I've now got the supply of cars. So yeah, there was a number of factors that came together. And I go back to the media side as well, which every day you can open a newspaper. The Daily Mail's a classic one, the Telegraph's another one, and there'll be a negative news story. You never read a positive EV story that says, man successfully charged his car on a public charger. You always read the negative, because negative news draws clicks. And that's what, the way the media operates. They always put the negative side out because that draws clicks and draws people's interest. And social media picks up on that, and it's scattered around the world. So by the time the media correct themselves, oh, actually we got it wrong, this is the actual story, social media picked it up and it's gone around. And I regularly talk to people now who come up with stories that have been proven time and time again are incorrect. And you think, where's that from? Oh, my mate down the pub told me, or I read it on social media, or I read it in it. Well, that's wrong. This. And it's frustrating, but you just got to keep sort of keeping your head down and keep pushing it forward, because EVs are going to happen. We've now got the ZEV mandate pushing through. We've now got the ban on petrol and diesel 2030, although that's coming back 2035, although that's coming back to 2030 with the new government. They're not committed to it yet, but they're talking, they are committed, but they haven't put a line in the sand yet to say that's, we're doing it. So yeah, it's going to happen. And it's more coming back to my military training. It's always a lot of people will sit and put barriers in the way and say, oh, blah blah, we can't because of this, that, and the other. And people have this natural resistance to change, and driving an EV is kind of a change of mindset.
Yeah.
But I always say, well, flip it around the other way. It's going to happen. So how do we make this happen? What can we do to make it happen? And that way we start looking at the positives and try. I have a home charger, and I can do 40 miles in my EV for 70p. You compare that to a petrol car equivalent, and it costs about £5.50 to do the same distance. So saving straight away. but people are quite content. No, I want to drive with what I know, and I know it's a petrol car or a diesel car, and I will carry on driving that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm very curious to get your thoughts on what you think is really behind it all. I mean, I suppose in some ways, like you're right, and I hadn't thought about that actually. EV is going to happen. It is. And so it's kind of like this sort of let's fail fast till we get to the outcome that we want, sort of thing. And okay, it's a global thing. So it's not such an easy thing to say, like, okay, everyone fail fast till we get to the solution because it's a global problem, it's financial, it's and so on. But what do you think is really behind it? Because it seems bizarre to me that government wouldn't want to back it. Although I do think that there's an element of they've got their own internal targets to stay in power and to keep people happy and so on. And so I think you're right in a lot of ways. The EV market has become a scapegoat for a variety of a lot of people's problems in the sense of, you know, people want to stay in power, or social media have got targets to generate clicks and get eyes on their news, and negative news sells. I mean, Elon Musk probably tapped into it perfectly when he tried to smash the window of his Cybertruck, and you know that flew. That went crazy. That story.
Yeah, but it drew the attention for him. Yeah.
But it was perfect for him because I'm sure he sold a lot of Cybertrucks off the back of it. You know, because it was global news.
I think one of the things I always try and do, and I come back to this point about trying to analyze the big picture, because a lot of people have got the headline awareness of what's going on in issues. And I always say, people always say to me, we're being forced to buy EVs because the government's going to ban the sale of petrol and diesels. But then flip it on its head and understand the bigger picture, that it's more of a pull market than it is a push. And the reason I say that is if you look at the UK, for example, and it's a similar situation across other countries, we all know about climate change, and we all know about global warming, and we all know about the impact of fossil fuel emissions on people's health. And we've seen that with the floods recently. We saw that in Spain. We see extreme weather things, and that's only going to get worse if we don't do something about it. If we look at greenhouse gas emissions in the UK, the largest emitting sector comes from transport at about 28%. And if you drill into that figure, probably about 80-85% of that figure comes from cars. So that's why the government is trying to move people away from fossil fuel usage, oil and diesel and petrol in cars, towards more sustainable and more environmentally friendly stuff like hydrogen, electric, biofuels. Now, for various reasons, electric is winning that race because electrics fall around us, so it's relatively easy to put in an EV charging network to support EV. So yeah, if you understand why we're doing it to save the environment, we're doing it better for our health, etc., then it kind of puts everything into a different context rather than, oh, the government's always forcing it. And I always come back and, you know, I don't want to be forced. Okay, but the government introduced speed limits and the compulsory wearing of seatbelts years ago. And people did that and they proved to save lives. So again, this is the government taking the bigger picture initiative to push something through for the benefit of the majority.
It's funny you say that. I to this day I remember my dad cramming like 5 of us in the back of the car with seatbelts to drive to the shop or something.
One across the parcel shelf and 4 in front.
Yeah, but it's amazing how things do change, and I even remember that was a thing. Seatbelts, like people, seatbelts, like I don't need a seatbelt, but you know, and also the EV thing is a mindset change as well. Yeah, I suppose I'm going to put you on the spot here, but if you were in government, right, you know, tiny Smith for Prime Minister, but if you 10 years, you know, if we go back 10 years, knowing what you know now, what do you think the government could have done differently in order to combat maybe the perception or even just the incentives, or it could even be just trying to get the buy-in, you know, more from people? What do you think they could have done differently?
I think more explanation. One of the things the government did was they pushed everything out to industry and said, right, you advertise EV charging, you promote that, you invest the money, you invest in EVs and everything else. And there wasn't enough, because it's the biggest change in the automotive industry that's happened in many, many years. You know, if you think about EVs, they've been around for 200 years, nearly 200 years. And in the 1890s, they were outselling gas cars by 10 to 1. And then they sort of died off, you know, gas cars took up for various reasons. And it's only relatively recently that EVs have come back into fruition because people are focusing on this climate change issue and all that business. So I think as a government, to promote that through, I think you needed more promotion of it from the top to say, this is why we're doing it. You know, it's a pull situation, the climate change and everything else. People are kind of aware of it, of why we need to move to EVs. But you still get people saying EVs are just a stopgap. Hydrogen's the way forward. You know, hydrogen's going to be the next 10 years. You know, people have been saying hydrogen is going to be the next big thing in 10 years for the last 10 years. And if you look at hydrogen cars, for example, there's something like 1.3 million EVs in the UK, and there's only about 300 hydrogen cars. So it's kind of a, you know, hydrogen isn't really going to take off for various reasons. I think the government could also probably look at reintroducing subsidies, because subsidies were very beneficial in growing the EV market. But then again, there comes a time when the market starts feeding itself and growing. And why pay more and more subsidies for people to buy cars? You know, only 15% of cars are bought by private individuals as new, and most of them go to fleets or outright as company cars.
Yeah.
I think attract foreign investment as well. So to increase the domestic EV production, because obviously we've got China now as a big issue going on.
Yeah.
And they're about a decade ahead of everybody else. So overall, I think the government and perhaps the automotive industry got caught with its pants down, arguably. You know, when Tesla started out years ago, they said, right, we're going to build an electric car, and all the other OEMs sat back and said, oh, that'll just be a passing fad. You know, nothing of it. Now those same OEMs are desperately trying to play catch up with the likes of Tesla. And all of a sudden, you got BYD and all the Chinese OEMs now coming over the horizon. And all the Western OEMs are going, Jesus, what are we going to do here? And they're trying to compete, and they just can't compete. They're really struggling.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I hear a lot. And it's more about like, how can Europe compete with China? You know, or is it too late? Because I don't know if I've ever seen, I've read about obviously the steel industry and how they, you know, there were certain steel suppliers that basically had everything, all the cards in their hand with the materials and the market and so on. And I feel like this is getting to that point when China's got all the materials that they need, they've got the cost now, the price at the right price. They're now getting there with the quality, and I think that's come with the sharing of information, you know, with internet and so on, because that used to be Europeans' trump card was, we've got the quality, we've got the engineering and so on, but they're leveling. Because I've been in some of these cars, man, they're nice, you know, they're slick, they seem to be high quality, but you know, and I think that's maybe a pain point and for some people is, and I think you say it's a little bit of a perfect storm. You know, life is expensive at the moment, so people look at cost, but they still want quality. And that's the perfect market for China. But what can Europe do then to combat that, do you reckon?
Well, it's. I mean, one of the things with China is back end of 2023, the Chinese OEMs started to exhibit in the EV shows around the world, and they were putting out very high spec, low cost cars. But what was hidden behind that was the Chinese government actually subsidized the Chinese OEMs to allow those low cost cars to be developed. So, of course, when you're bringing those across into the Western markets, you've got a very cheap car. Governments are in a big dilemma at the moment with China, because on the one hand, cheaper EVs is what the market needs in order to promote that growth that we said earlier. Because obviously, as with TVs, you start off with the very expensive models at the top, and then over time, mass production brings those prices down with new models. And that's the same with EVs. You started off with the big I-Paces and Bentleys and all that sort of business EVs. And now that you're starting to get that cheaper end of the market. So on the one hand, the government needs the Chinese imports to come in. But on the other hand, that's going to undercut their own automotive industries. So they've got to try and balance that. And hence you see this thing of tariffs coming up. So the Americans have put 100% tariff on Chinese imports coming in to try and protect their own automotive industry. Europe have put a sliding scale between 17 and 35.3%, I think it is, depending on the manufacturer, and worked out depending on how much subsidy they've had from the Chinese government. The UK hasn't put any subsidies on Chinese imports at the moment because they're trying to promote trade with China. The problem we have with China is that they now lead in EV in the battery market with price and technology. If you look at the battery market, for example, China pretty much got a finger in all the pies of the lithium mines around the world. So about 7% of the lithium goes through China to be refined. If you look at the gigafactories that make the batteries, probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of them are within Chinese borders from, worldwide. So they've got a stranglehold on the battery market. And hence you've seen the likes of JLR, Ford, and various, and VW building their own gigafactories outside of China to try and break away from that. But now you put these tariffs on, that's not really going to slow it down, because now you're seeing BYD, I think it is, are going to build a factory in Turkey. So, obviously they get over that sort of tariff situation by building on board. So yeah, can we get over China? I think the only thing we can do is try and get partnerships with China. They've got the technology. In the past, we had the technology and we had the know-how and the price and everything else. Now China have got that hand. So now what we've got to do is try and get partnerships with China to learn how they make things so cheap, how they make them so perfect, and try and get into that sort of league. There's no point in trying to compete with them, but you got to get in bed with them to sort of match what they're doing.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that with the tariffs point of view, because when I first thought about tariffs, I thought that's actually quite a good idea. At least then kind of levels the playing field, but that kicks on different problems, And interestingly as well, money talks in these situations, because there will be a country that is connected to Europe somehow that will say, hey, if we can make a deal, you can make them here and you can put them across the border,
China is probably one of the biggest automotive markets. It used to be for Jaguar Land Rover when I worked there many years ago. And Tesla, Elon Musk built a Tesla factory out in China, because then it got down on the import tax and everything else, and all the shipping and logistics are going across there. So, China are going to do the same thing now. They're going to come out and they're going to start building in Europe and see if they can get in the US foothold as well, because it cuts down on all the costs and gets around all the tariffs. So yeah, it's a moving feast out there. But China have really shaken up the market at the moment. So to compete, they've got to bring the prices down on the Western side of it. And of course, the ZEV mandate now, that's another big debate, where we've got to hit 22% of EV sales this year. Oversupply of cars. And in order to do that, they're going to have to reduce prices, unless they're going to ride the £15,000 per car where they don't meet the target. So yeah, there's sort of this big moving feast going on.
Yeah, because I often think about my own situation, and I think, Ricky, what do I need to do to get an EV car and the whole setup? And because I do, like, in my mind, I'm probably a typical, maybe not so much, because I'm going to have 4 kids soon, so it's the 7-seater EV market isn't so big, but actually there's some really nice, like the Mercedes, they've got some nice cars there as well for 7 seats. And but what I think about it is like, okay, it's going to be a big investment, but there will be a return of investment through like the petrol and so on, because I won't be spending that much money on that. And actually, with companies, you do have these schemes, electric car schemes, which actually are really helpful and really valuable. And it's just the stretch to get to that. But even someone that kind of in this space, there is a severe lack of information or steps to, how do I get interested in an electric car to the point of actually having one in my front?
I think the best advocates, because I get a lot of approaches. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've got, I don't know, 15,000 followers or something like that. And I get a lot of people approaching me on the quiet and sending me a DM and saying, I'm interested in an electric car. How do I do it? What do I do? And I think the best advocates for EVs are people like myself, people who drive in EV now, and we've stepped into the EV arena, and all of a sudden we appreciate that it's easier to drive because you've got one pedal driving, it's more economical, it's quieter, it's more fun, because something like a Tesla, it's an instantaneous acceleration, whereas a petrol or diesel car, you floor it and then it goes and then picks up. There is a bit of a challenge with it's one of the things the industry is trying to sort out at the moment. So when you buy a car, you do the research, decide what car you want, and then you go to the fuel station and fill up. With an EV, you do the same research and buy the car, but then if you've got off-street parking, as 60% of homes in the UK have, you can then research your home charger and work out how to, which one you want, and you got to work out the energy tariff you're going to put it on. So there's a few hurdles to sort of get through, but then once you get through it, it's beneficial. And I think they did a survey recently, and there was something like 90% of people who had stepped into the EV arena didn't want to go back into petrol or diesel vehicles because they, seen the light, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But it's just making that initial leap. And I come back to that point I said earlier, that people are naturally resistant to change. I just prefer to maintain the status quo and carry on driving my petrol car, oblivious to the fact that all the emissions are causing damage to the environment and people's health. So it's just talk to people, and there's plenty of information out on the internet. If you just look and go out and talk to people and look on the internet, and you'll see the reports on the cars and the EVs, and you'll get first world hand. Equally, you will get a lot of YouTubers and social influencers and social media who say, oh, an EV is terrible for me. And I read reports in the media where somebody has gone out and borrowed an EV for a weekend, some reporter, and somehow managed to find 3 consecutive charges in the public arena that weren't working, writes a big story about them. And I think that is a hell of a feat, to find 3 consecutive charges that aren't working when the ratio is 1 in 10. And you do have to question, is it you that doesn't understand how to use the charger, or is there something wrong with the car? Because that's a hell of a coincidence to do that. So don't always believe everything you read in social media.
No, I think it could be an element of that. I think there's definitely, when it comes to journalism, like we talked about beginning, negativity sells, and so there could be an element of that. And I just think, I was just thinking as you were saying that, even just the process, because like when I bought my car out there now, and it's a diesel car, don't shoot me, but because I need it for the 7 seats. But it was so easy to buy. It was literally, you go there. I traded in my old car, and I pretty much had it that same day. When I think about the EV stuff, I do think, okay, I've got to buy that. Then I've got to think of the home charger. I've got to think of the energy tariffs. And it's almost like, is there a space for a broker to be like, hey, I'll deal with all this for you. You just choose your car and get that done.
If you look at stuff like Octopus electric vehicles, for example, they will sell you the EV, the tariff, and the home charger and everything else all in one. So most EV drivers go to Octopus because you
interesting. That's who my provider is, actually. Interesting.
Yeah. So if you get on the right tariff, they'll do 7p per kilowatt overnight, which gives you that sort of 40 miles for 70p. But even those people who haven't got off-street parking, there's a lot of options now, because people want to come home and park outside the house overnight. And there's a lot of options like Curbo Charge, where they put a channel in the pavement and you can run your charging cable across the pavement. There's a real growth in that residential charging arena. It is slightly more expensive to charge in the public arena, but again, you have to understand there are a whole variety of charges, and it all comes down to what we call the dwell time, of how long you're likely to be in the area. So, the more power to charge a car faster will cost more. So if you park your car outside your home and it's going to be there overnight, you don't really want to pay for an expensive 350 kilowatt charger that's going to charge a car in 20 minutes. When a cheaper 7 kilowatt charger in the street will, work better for you. But likewise, if you're in a motorway services, the 350 kilowatt charger makes sense. 7 kilowatt will be useless. So again, it's on the scenario and how fast you really want to charge your car. So again, there's that sort of education piece. And again, I come back to the media again. I remember them doing petrol, reports when fuel prices were going up, and they were out of motorway services and saying, "Oh, look how expensive it is." But we all know when we drive petrol and diesel cars, you don't fill your car up, or you don't tend to fill your car up on motorway services. You tend to just top up enough to get you to your destination. And likewise, motorway services, EV charging is going to be expensive. Yeah. Again, just top your car up to get you home, or to wherever you want to go, your destination.
Yeah, and I think I do think from this conversation, one of the things I've learned is that there is, I think, a lack of education of the public, and I also do think that there is this sort of negative news sales sort of thing. So how do we change that, though? How do we change that? Because I do think, I completely agree with you that everybody's like, yeah, EV is a good idea. I think it's going to be it's definitely going to come, and I like the idea of an electric car, but I think that's as far as a lot of people go in their heads. And how do we then change that, I suppose, the story or the paradigm that the media is spinning from time to time, to then make it a positive one? What do you think we should do?
I think it's a real sort of education piece. It's just getting the message out time and time again. And I always have this analogy that the EV drivers in the pro EV brigade are like pebbles rolling along in a stream. We're gradually chipping away at the EV negativity bedrock, and over time we're going to become this mighty canyon stream, because it's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. I think there's an education piece. You were talking earlier. I mean, EVs, you want a 7-seater. A few years ago, people said, I can't get an EV because I can't tow. And there was a problem with regeneration circuit. But now you get EVs that can tow. There are 7-seater EVs out there now as well. I think the Tesla Model Y, I think, has got the rear seats as well.
Cybertruck.
So, yeah, no, not the Cybertruck. The Model Y has got, the Cybertruck's a huge thing. You won't see it every day. But it's, so the models are being produced over time that cater for the wider market. The other thing to look at is the finance side of it. So you have this sort of salary sacrifice. I was looking yesterday, Tesla Model 3 basic range, £239 a month. They were advertising when I was at the show. Sort of salary sacrifice, and then you get the benefit in kind if you can get it as a company car. The second-hand market on EVs as well is getting very, very buoyant at the moment. But there's a lot of people get concerned about the battery and saying, oh, well, how do I know the battery life and everything else? Just to put that in context, pretty much all EVs have an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty on the battery. And that is based on a worst case scenario where you have someone who supercharges the battery constantly and drives it like a lunatic everywhere. And in that worst case scenario, the battery is assumed to have 70% capacity at the 8-year point. Most normal EV drivers, you and I would probably we'll still have sort of 90% plus at the end of 8 years. So all this worry about batteries is kind of, when you get into context, it kind of puts it into a different sort of scenario when you understand the picture of it. The other thing is, there's another thing that seems to go well on LinkedIn, just to bring you on about the battery. A lot of people are worried about the battery and it's destroying the earth and blah, 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 and all the rest of it. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the battery on an EV is pretty much the same composition as the battery in your mobile phone, your laptop, your rechargeable toothbrush, your cordless drill, and everything else. So the cobalt used in some EV batteries is also heavily used in the refining process to create the petrol and diesel for your ICE vehicle, for your internal combustion engine. So again, when people go on about the batteries destroying the planet for EVs and being an EV-centric issue, it's not. It's actually, there's a bigger picture to this. Again, when you put it into context and understand the bigger picture, you suddenly realize that the device that you're typing your message on that says, oh, EVs are bad, is actually part of the problem, causing the problem with the Earth's mining facilities and everything else. So it's again, I always put things in the context. When I write articles on LinkedIn, they seem to draw a lot of attention because I write things in context and put it into context. And of course, I get the anti-EV trolls coming along, and they'll, oh, no, you don't know what you're talking about. What about this? And they'll pull up a report from 15 years ago, and it's sort of, no, the industry's moved on since then, and that's not quite correct. Oh, okay. What about this? And it's like whack-a-mole all the way through. Okay, we'll back that one down. What about this? No, whack that one down. And you constantly get that sort of thing going on. But you just got to keep getting that message coming. What you said earlier, getting the message out there, putting the good out. EVs are going to happen. And I said earlier, let's flip it around and say, how do we make this happen? How do we benefit people? And arguably, it comes back to the Lord's report saying the government needs to start pushing these positive news stories out there and getting the real facts out there.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. And I think that it's, I think this is part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I do think that there is a feeling of it's I don't know, it's all gone wrong, but actually everyone needs to just calm down and be like, hey, let's look at the facts. It's not so bad. It's still growing. We're in a change mindset kind of phase at the moment as a global problem or challenge, and even just like you say on the combustion engine and EV, because you have a global, the whole world is consuming this product. There's always going to be these issues. Okay, what do we do with the waste? No matter what direction you go, There's always going to be that. And then the question is, okay, which one is more sustainable? And certainly it looks like clearly that the EV market is going to be that road that we have to take to be more sustainable. It's very well documented and reported. But and again, I think that's just a lack of information thing. You know, people just don't have access to that. They don't have time for that. And
I think the information's out there. It's just people don't, as you say, they don't have time for it. And a lot of people just take that headline awareness, but they don't get into the detail. And sometimes getting into the detail, you know, helps people understand.
Yeah. No, and it's been really interesting. And what I've learned from this conversation is, just for everyone to calm down, actually look at the facts in the sense of the market's still growing significantly. I think it's not too late to compete against China. We can pivot. We can figure out a way to either partner up or improve on our strategy on that. And we've just got to start talking a little bit more positive about EV vehicles and educate ourselves and have Tiny Smith run for Prime Minister so we can change the dynamic.
But seriously, my LinkedIn profile is Randal Tiny Smith. I'm 6'7", so hence the tiny, my military nickname, ex-rugby player. And if people want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, by all means, just reach out. I'm more than happy to sort of help people, have a chat with people about EVs if I can help. I do it quite often. I get a lot of people reaching out to me and more than happy to help.
Pleasure. No, thanks very much, Tiny, for coming on. And hopefully everyone has had an education from this.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Joel.